It all started on a quiet stretch of highway when flashing red and blue lights cut through the rearview mirror of a decorated black soldier driving home from duty. What should have been a routine moment turned into a nightmare when the officer stormed out of his car, gun already drawn, barking orders like the soldier was a dangerous criminal. Bystanders froze. Cameras went up. The soldier, calm but tense, kept his hands high, his uniform hidden beneath his jacket. No one yet knew who he really was, or the shocking twist that would leave even the officer himself standing at attention, saluting the very man he had just threatened. The soldier's name was Marcus Bennett, a decorated serviceman who had returned from multiple tours overseas. To his community, he was more than a soldier. He was a role model, a quiet figure of strength who often spoke at schools about discipline, sacrifice, and pride. That day, Marcus was simply driving home after a long shift, his duffel bag tossed in the back seat, still wearing his boots from the base. It was early evening, the sky painted orange with sunset, when the patrol car appeared behind him. Marcus wasn't speeding. He wasn't swerving. He knew the drill. He had been pulled over before for driving while black, but he hoped just this once it would be different. His military ID sat in his wallet, his uniform folded neatly beside him. Proof of his service, evidence of his dignity, proof of who he really was. But the officer never asked for any of that. Instead, the moment Marcus pulled over, the cop's hand went to his weapon. The gun glinted under the fading sunlight, aimed directly at Marcus's chest before he could even roll his window down. Drivers passing by slowed, whispering, some recording the scene. To them, it looked like just another traffic stop spiraling out of control. They didn't know Marcus. They didn't know his story. Inside the car, Marcus felt a mix of anger, fear, and disbelief. He had faced hostile enemies overseas, but never thought he'd feel more threatened on his own soil by someone sworn to protect it. And as the officer inched closer, finger tight on the trigger, no one could imagine that this so-called routine stop was seconds away from flipping into one of the most unforgettable reversals anyone had ever witnessed. Marcus kept his hands steady on the steering wheel, knuckles tight, heart pounding. Training had taught him to stay calm in hostile situations. Still, nothing in combat prepared him for this. The eyes of a police officer locked on him with suspicion, fear, and hostility. The cop shouted orders. "Don't move! Keep your hands where I can see them!" As if Marcus hadn't already frozen. Passers-by slowed, pulling out their phones, whispering as tension grew. Every second felt like it might explode. Marcus thought of his mother, who always told him to come home, safe. He thought of his brothers in uniform, who faced enemies abroad but also shared quiet stories about being treated like suspects in their own neighborhoods. It was a cruel irony. Here he was, a man trusted with protecting the nation, yet considered dangerous just for the color of his skin. The officer circled closer, barking questions Marcus couldn't even answer without risking a sudden movement. His jacket hid his uniform, and without it visible, he looked like any other black man pulled over on the wrong road at the wrong time. Inside, Marcus fought the urge to shout back, to demand respect. But he also knew how quickly defiance could turn deadly. So he stayed still, his voice calm but firm, speaking only when absolutely necessary. By now, a small crowd had gathered. Some muttered angrily under their breath, others prayed. One older man whispered, "He's a good kid. I know him." But the officer wasn't listening. His mind was locked in suspicion. Minutes ticked like hours. The barrel of the gun hovered, steady, unrelenting. Marcus wondered if this would be the day his name became another headline, another face on a poster, another statistic. Then a sharp gust of wind swept across the road, nudging the edge of Marcus's jacket off his shoulder. Beneath it, just barely visible, was the collar of his military uniform. A few in the crowd noticed, gasping softly. The whispers grew louder. Phones zoomed in. The officer blinked, startled, as the faint patch of a U.S. Army insignia came into view. Doubt flickered in his eyes. His voice, once so commanding, faltered for the first time, but instead of lowering his weapon, he tightened his grip, torn between his assumptions and the evidence in front of him. He demanded that Marcus step out of the car. The risk grew higher. The moment Marcus moved. One wrong twitch could end everything. Slowly, carefully, Marcus complied. He pushed the door open with calculated precision, stepping into the open air. The crowd leaned forward, holding their breath. When Marcus stood upright, the last of his jacket slipped off, revealing the full uniform beneath. His chest bore the Medals of Honor. His stance carried the weight of discipline and sacrifice. He was no stranger to standoffs, but this was not the battlefield he had trained for. Gasps turned into shouts. "He's a soldier!" someone cried out. "Look at his uniform!" The officer froze, realization crashing down. He had pulled a gun not on a threat, but on a decorated hero who had risked his life for the very freedom the officer claimed to defend. And in that heavy silence, everyone knew the next few seconds would decide whether this moment ended in tragedy or in a stunning reversal no one would ever forget. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. The officer's gun was still raised, but his grip trembled. The whispers of the crowd turned into pointed shouts, demanding he lower the weapon. Marcus stood tall, shoulders squared, the medals on his uniform glinting in the fading light. He didn't flinch. He didn't beg. He simply stood as the man he was, a soldier, a protector, a living contradiction to every false stereotype that had brought this moment to life. The crowd's voices grew sharper, angrier. "He's a soldier! Put the gun down! You're threatening a hero!" Phones recorded every second. Live streams lit up across social media, the moment already spreading beyond the highway. The officer's face flushed red. His certainty had cracked. Here he was, gun pointed at a man who had likely seen more danger, in service than he ever had in uniform himself. His authority now hung by a thread, and then something no one expected happened. Slowly, the officer lowered his weapon. His jaw clenched, his breath ragged. For a long pause, he stared at Marcus as if realizing the full weight of what he'd just done. Marcus didn't move. He didn't need to. His very presence demanded respect, and then, almost instinctively, the officer's hand rose. Not with the gun, but in a sharp, practiced motion. A salute, a gesture of recognition, of honor, of forced humility in the face of truth. The crowd gasped again, this time in disbelief. The same man who had seconds earlier treated Marcus like a criminal now stood stiff, saluting the very soldier he had humiliated. It was a reversal so powerful, so symbolic, that even those watching through their screens felt chills. For Marcus, it wasn't about pride or victory. It was about survival, dignity, and the bitter reminder that respect came only when his uniform spoke louder than his skin. And as cameras continued to roll, that haunting salute would burn into memory, not as an act of honor, but as a symbol of everything wrong and everything that still needed to change. The officer's salute hung in the air, stiff and awkward, a desperate attempt to mask what had just unfolded. But the damage was already done. Every second had been recorded, every breath witnessed by the dozens who stood in stunned silence on the side of the road, and by the thousands who would soon see it online. Marcus lowered his gaze briefly, then turned away, not acknowledging the salute. To him, it was hollow. Respect offered only after humiliation was no respect at all. He walked back toward his car, his posture steady, his dignity intact, though the weight of the moment pressed heavy on his chest. The crowd erupted, not in applause, but in anger. People shouted at the officer, some calling for his badge, others swearing they'd file complaints. Within hours, the footage spread like wildfire, sparking outrage across the country. The clip of the officer pointing his weapon, followed by his awkward salute, became a viral symbol of hypocrisy, proof that racism could strip a man of his humanity until his uniform forced the world to see his worth. In the days that followed, Marcus's story dominated headlines. Civil rights leaders condemned the incident. Fellow soldiers voiced their disgust. Communities asked a painful question: why must a black man wear a uniform covered in medals to be seen as more than a threat? For Marcus, the ordeal became a defining moment. He didn't seek fame. He didn't want attention. But he spoke out, not for himself, but for every black man and woman who faced the same suspicion without a uniform to shield them. His words echoed far beyond the viral clip. Respect should never depend on the clothes I wear, but on the humanity we all share. And that, perhaps, was the greatest irony of all. A salute meant to honor became a symbol of shame. A moment meant to control became a spark for change. So the next time someone watches that clip, an officer lowering his weapon, then saluting the soldier he nearly shot, they are left with one burning question. If a soldier has to wear medals to be respected, what chance does an unarmed black teenager have? This line would strongly push engagement in comments plus shares.